Hi, folks. I am Tom Johnson Medlin. I am one of the psychosocial um, directors at Bayada Hospice. And I wanted to spend some time with you today trying to break up some of the long stretches of hours of nothing during this COVID pandemic. And I thought maybe a useful way to spend some time together might be to share some poetry of one of our most beloved poets in America, Robert Frost. So we're going to have Bob with us today, and he's going to share some of his wonderful writings. I thought maybe we would just start out with a brief introduction about Frost's life. So I'm sure many of you will remember that he was an inaugural poet at the inauguration of uh, John F. Kennedy. And I thought one of the beautiful things about that is, uh, as a poet, seen many times as a scatterbrain kind of artist, when he actually got to the inauguration, he forgot the poem that he had written for the event and ended up having to recite another poem from memory that was one of his. So it's just a little colorful story. But and one of my favorite quotes that comes from Frost himself as a writer, he says, "A word rises, finds an emotion, and then becomes a poem." So his sense of his writing, his sense of poesis, as it's called for poetry, the writing of poetry. Poesis is about a word rising up within us, and that word looking for some kind of emotion and grabbing a hold of it. And then once it grabs that emotion, it becomes a poem. So he was born in San Francisco in 1874. And I think most people equate him with New England, but don't realize he was born in California. He was mostly taught by his mother, and he attended Dartmouth College in 1892 and also Harvard, both part time and at different points in his life. And he never graduated from either university. As a matter of fact, he held no degree except honorary degrees. When he was 16, he wrote his first poem and decided that he would be a poet from that time on. He was married at the age of 21 and moved to England during the period of 1900 to 1909 and lived there for quite some time. While he was in England, he spent some time writing back and forth to his grandfather, who had said to him, uh, it's not an honorable profession to be a poet. You'll never survive. You'll never make a living of it. So what happened was the grandfather, while he was in England, promised him that he would give him the farm in New England if he would not succeed as a poet. And so Frost was a little uncomfortable with that and said, let's put a time limit on it. How about we measure it by whether or not I can get published and start receiving some sort of salary? And so the grandfather agreed and said that this is the backup plan. And he gave him 5 years to make it really a solid profession for himself. And Frost was actually able to do that, but actually also received the farm as well. And so that's why we know of him as a New England poet. He then lived in New England. He received a lot of honors and also spoke quite frequently and taught quite frequently at colleges, despite the fact that he did not have a degree. And I think the poem that he shared at the inauguration was The Gift Outright for John F. Kennedy. So I think pretty much that is a really good synopsis. It's really enough information for us to know about Frost. I think one of the other things that's really important for us to know is that in Frost, a lot of Americana has been redeveloped. While we associate a lot of the development of the American colonies as the time period in which we gained a real firm footing as a country, as a people, and had some sort of artistic expression, right? Frost is able to take that same level of commitment to what does it mean to be an artist in America and take it to the next place to elevate the status of the writer and in particular for him, the poet in the American landscape. So I think the person who did that prior to Frost, right, that also was successful at that was Walt Whitman. So, we have very, very few pre-turn of the century poets who took center stage, and a handful after the turn of the century. And we can name them, right? They become people that are iconic when we think of literary history in America. So I've picked a few poems for us to read today from Frost. The first is The Dust of Snow. It's one of the ones I love because it's very, very Frostian, right? It has a real strong sense of imagery, and it also has a real strong sense of feeling. And remember how he talks about a word bubbling up and grabbing hold of an emotion, and then that's what becomes a poem. I think he also, in many places in his poetry, he puts things in place that are very feelable, if you will. Okay, so in this one, we'll talk a little bit about what that feelable moment is, but The Dust of Snow. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. So the feelable moment, right, is when that crow lands on the hemlock tree and shakes that snow down and lands on us. Right? You have felt that, right? And it may not have been a crow that shook snow off of a hemlock for you, but maybe you just brushed into a bush and hit the main trunk of the tree hard enough that it shook the whole tree and all the snow came down on top of you. But that is a real feelable moment when you're in the poem, because your heart and your mind immediately go to the feeling of coldness on the skin. And this is Frost's gift to us. Other poets use other techniques, but Frost uses nature quite frequently, and the feeling that we have when we are there in nature to draw us into the poem. More importantly, to draw us into ourselves, to find a center, right? The idea of homeostasis, or the ability to stabilize our hearts and our minds and to become calm and open, is a gift of Frost's poem. And so, as always, you always read a poem twice, never read it just once. Second time, you'll hear it differently. And you also always read a poem out loud so that people around you can think you're crazy. The Dust of Snow. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. I think the word rude, right, to rue something, not R-U-D-E, that person was rude, but to rue an event, to hold it in a negative feeling inside, and to dread perhaps, or um, wish it would not come to pass, right? Or feel a sense of trepidation. It's a word that's not used often, but I think we all can feel in this very strong word that it is quite often something very small and something very visceral or physical, right, that can change a deep feeling of anxiety or trepidation, of ruing, of ruminating. Right? It can be instantly changed by simple and small and singular events. And I think Frost is a wonderful way of telling us that and reminding us that, and actually very timely, right? There's no snow around us now, but there are some things that we rue on a daily basis. And having those things shifted, often by small acts of kindness, is how we see them shift. But having those days shift their meaning is so powerful for us during this pandemic. Poem number 2, Fire and Ice. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice. It is also great and would suffice. So, as usual with Frost, there's a level of playfulness with words in this poem, right? And he's giving us the option of how things end. Right? Will it end in fire? Will it end in ice. And this actually seems to be about the closest that uh, Robert comes to stating any form of religious thought, right? His sense of religion is really a wise philosophical approach to life, sort of the New England farmer who is also a philosopher. That is more his sense of understanding how the world is held together and what it is propelled by or brought forward by. Right? Mythology is another way that people believe that the world is explained, right? Or faith and religion are other ways that it is explained. But this is probably the closest to a mythological theme where you can see in any great religion and any great mythology that there's how the world is going to come to an end. And this actually reminds me a lot of, and he probably picked up some while he was in England, some of the Nordic mythology, which was very, very prevalent in the turn of the century when he was in England. The discovery of new myth, but also the translation of mythology and talking about whether the world will end in fire or whether it will end in ice. Just this powerful sense. But I do believe that this whole idea of the pandemic has allowed to surface within us almost an apocalyptic feel, right? And it's no wonder with everybody being asked to stay at home and asked to be wearing masks and gloves and all sorts of restrictions and all sorts of invisibility that we're really frightened of, right? Because we can't see the virus. It's not like people that have the virus turn green, so we know stay away from that person. But at the same time, in very similar fashion, we see on television for the last 8 to 10 years this development of zombie apocalypse, and more shows with zombies. And the whole theme of zombie movies or art of zombies is the coming of a change in people's lives, whether that coming of change could be the end of the world, which most zombie movies are about something very similar, right? That the world is coming to a close. But this poem talks about some things that are in our hearts right now, and that we've seen in movies in the past 10 years, right? And that is the world at a cataclysmic stage of its development? And are we taking care of it enough to know that it will still be here later? So I think even though it's a playful poem, even though it's simple and it almost sounds like a Dr. Seuss uh, piece of writing, right? Because it has that cadence and that rhyme to it. Even though it has all of those features of lightness, it also is dealing with a pretty heavy topic. So I thought it was pretty relevant for this. So let me read it again the second time. Fire and ice. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice. I think on the second reading too, we can also hear that there's not only a conversation about what the Nordic people call Ragnarok, or the end of the world, but I also think fire and ice are revealed not only as possible terms for how a world comes to close, but they're also very powerful terms about a heart may feel, right? And so, what are the two big feels in there that we have? We have the feel that is fire of desire, and the other feel is that of ice, which is of hate. So, not only a poem that calls to mind the possibility of the ending of things, but also the powerful and visceral nature of some of our very own human emotions, and how desire can feel a whole lot different as a feeling than hatred. And yet both of them can arise in the same heart. So he's crafty, is he not? He's put together not only a poem about mythology, but also about anthropology and psychology, about the way we deal person to person with each other. And I'd have to say that a world without hatred would be a much more pleasant place to live, shall we say? Fire and ice. Nothing gold can stay. Now, this is one of the ones that comes out usually in September. There's this wonderful thing that happens in our lives as we approach end of August, beginning of September. There is generally a day where you walk outside and you feel that the wind is coming from a little different direction and that the light is slanting in at a very different angle than it usually does. And you somehow in your mind say, autumn is coming. Some of it has to do with the way the light is changing, or some of it does have to do with the wind that one day. It also has to do with driving around and walking around and seeing tangentially out of the corner of your eyes and noting it somewhere in the back of your head that you just saw that, ooh, the sumacs are starting to turn orange and the sassafras are starting to turn yellow. And all of a sudden we start to enter into a change of season, right? And our seasonal changes are very, very dramatic, and they become really wonderful expressions of the seasons of life and the different phases and places we go to throughout our life to grow, to change, to hunker down and develop, right? So the larger of the most visual sets of changes we see are in autumn and in winter and in spring. The change from spring to summer is gradual, and while it is very, very different, it is not as loud because we don't see quite the same burst, right? But if you think about it, we do get a huge burst of green, and everything goes green once we know we are in summer. It happens so much more gradually and seems less alive than does the multicolors of fall, the bleak whiteness and grayness of winter, and then the multicolors of spring. Right? So we move into the great greenness of the summer. But each of those very, very powerful and different seasons. And so we have seasons in our life. And I think there's no doubt that Frost alludes most often in his poems of nature to seasons that exist there and tries to bring a connection. Nothing gold can stay. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold, her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, and Eden sinks to grief. So dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. What a lovely reminder of life's many cycles. Right? There are cycles that happen in the day, right? Dawn goes down to day, beginning of the day, the end of the day. We have this small cycle each 24 hours. We have the sense where the early leaf is a flower in springtime. The leaf, before it is a leaf, is a flower first. Then it graduates into the form of a leaf. Then it graduates into its own undoing and falls off of the tree. And that, again, is another process. That cycle not being 24 hours, but being the cycle of a year. And then he talks about Eden sinking to grief. And again, a mythology alluded to here, right? And the mythology is from the Judeo-Christian and Islamic tradition, right? Where Eden is seen as paradise or the beginning of things, the fruitful beginning of things, and the blissful, fruitful beginning of things. And that fruitful, blissful beginning of things sinks down into grief. Talking about here the one thing that many, many poets have identified as the cycle of life, and that is, if you want to hold bliss, if you want to hold kindness and love and compassion and light, if you want to hold them as the only thing that matters in life, you have to also hold sorrow as the other thing that matters in life. So if you're going to say that bliss is the only thing that matters in life, you must also say that the other thing, the only other thing that matters in life is also grief and sorrow. And that sense of balance is what he strikes out for again in this poem. That, yeah, you can say that. You can, you can say Eden's the most important thing, but you also have to say the other most important thing is that there is a sense of sorrow attached to everything. And for many of us, I think one of the things we've discovered is that our sense of sorrow in life is deeply attached to our sense of love and joy. Right? That when someone we love dies, the depth of that sorrow is the same or it's parallel to the heights of our love for that person. So if this is where our life is here and we love somebody this much, when they pass from our life, either through death or through moving away, the grief that we feel will probably be about the same measurement, but instead of being above and a positive, it'll be a downward or the negative emotion, and it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just that when we have deep love and deep joy, when we lose the things that bring us that, then we will also feel deep sorrow. There's no judgment in that for us. I think it's just a natural principle that we all recognize. And here, he recognizes it through the cycle of flower, leaf, color change, falling off of the tree. So, very, very powerful poem with, 8 lines? What a master. Nothing gold can stay. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. And the piece that's so powerful about the golden imagery is we have all, at one point in our lives, walked a path between golden trees of autumn. And when you are in the middle of a path of the golden trees of autumn, no matter where you are, and particularly if you're around a ginkgo tree, you'll be completely lit afire with powerful amazement and wonder at the beauty of it all. But if you're walking a path with golden autumn glow all around you, you know how electric that feels, how powerful and how invigorating the heart opens and feels great joy, right? He touches that for us and says, it's there, it's in us. We hold on to those times. We've been through them. Yes, the leaves will fall off. And yes, it will happen again next year. So that the cycle is not only one of a sense of losing, but a sense of redistributing once again the power and wonder and awe and joy and grandeur and beauty of life. 8 lines, folks. Wish I could write 8 lines like that. Good stuff. I've heard it said that, I'm pretty sure it's the ginkgo tree, that all of the leaves fall off at the same time. And there are people, and I think if I'm correct in that, if it's not the ginkgo tree, I'm sorry, but there is a tree, and it does happen, and there are people that watch for it. So, oh dear Robert, I think I have 2 more before we close. Both pivotal poems in the lives of Americans. I think every school child reads these poems. And unfortunately, today, we do not memorize poetry, but when my parents were children, it was standard fare. And there were a few poems when I was a child that we were asked to remember, but it wasn't remember every poem, memorize it, and earlier school taught through repetition and memorization. But I think as a nation and as a people and as a culture, we have memorized these lines because they are pure Frost, pure Americana, and deep words of philosophical worth and value. The road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as far as that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Some very, very, very powerful classic lines in this, right? But I want to jump to the one that has such magical meaning, um, which is the last line. And that has made all the difference. I think every time I read this poem, first of all, I want to read it with a Yankee accent of the far north. And that has made all the difference, which is exactly how that phrase was ruminating inside Frost for years. In his little New England town, Robert used to go frequently to visit his friend who was a blacksmith and who made handles and blades and all sorts of other tool heads and their accompanying wooden handles, right? And one of the things that he made a lot of were axes. And a fellow stopped in one day. Robert happened to be there visiting his friend, having coffee, which was par for the course several times a week. And the fellow came in and said, do you have any axe handles? And so the fellow who was the blacksmith said, of course I have axe handles. I'd be glad to make one for you. Do you have your axe head? And he said, I have it. He goes, I'm wondering what kind of handles you have. What kind of wood do you use? And Frost's friend said, I only use hickory, and that has made all the difference. So a line that has been lapidary, right? Right? Carved in stone is what lapidary means. It's a lapidary and laconic sentence, laconic, short, right? And memorable. Lapidary and laconic. And that has made all the difference. This line that we've heard and we have such warmth and affection for lived inside Frost for many years until he found a place for it to come out onto the page. And in genuine disbelief, I marvel at the fact that this line came from a blacksmith shop and had to do with an axe handle and the kind of wood that was used for it. And it doesn't really come from the poem itself, right? He just held onto it long enough until it fell out onto the page. So here it fits, and what a wonderful place for it to land. It has made all the difference. But what has made all the difference in this poem? Let's go back and take a look at that. And I think as far as the feel, we can all genuinely feel a path that diverges, right? That splits in half, that forks, and that we have a choice to make. And that we must, every day, any path, we've got to pick the direction. And when we pick one direction, it means we don't get the other direction then, now, in time and space. You can only get one way, right? So this he has the person wrestling with that. Is seeing the path. They're both worn about the same. No leaves had been mushed down or trodden black, as he said. Right? You know how when the leaves fall and no one's walked through them and they're not either pressed down or they're not kicked up. You can't see a path through them. You can only see the fullness of the path. Right? You don't see a place where someone's walked. So both of them were pretty much the same. It's not like he could say, "Oh, I'll take this one because more people went there and it's got to have a better view," or "I'll take this one because it's less traveled." Right? I really don't know which one. And in fact, both of them are less traveled right at this point. So there's that quandary of when we arrive in a situation where we're not sure of where it goes or how we want to go upon it. So he's got that. Um, at some point, he recognizes that, if I pick this one, I can't go on that one today and now. Like maybe I'll go on it later. And then, he also wrestles very quickly with the fact that I probably won't ever come back to the other one. So when I do make this choice, I'm making it. Um, there's some chat because of a letter that Frost wrote later to a dear friend in France after he had written this poem. He kind of jokes with how much time people spend trying to interpret this poem. And the letter alluded to the fact that he kind of wrote the poem as a joke for people who spend too much time eluding the meaning and looking for that elusive meaning in poetry. But we don't really know whether that was just an offhanded comment that he said to a friend in a letter, or whether genuinely he did write this as kind of a satire of the fact that we spend far too much time talking about, things that we think are far more important than may actually be. So there's always that possibility, right? Uh, but I do love the sense of the way in which he has really laid out for us an understanding of what life is. I mean, we do spend a lot of time at the crossroads figuring out whether we're going to go left or right, weighing whether there's, any rightness or wrongness to the decision to go left or right. And then at some point we have to make a decision, and we go down one of those paths. And what happens is we begin to recognize life because of that path. We see life because of the things that we experience then at that turn, at that juncture. And it is very different than it would have been if we went down the other, right? Because on the other path, there was a mill that we didn't know about. On the other path, there was also a valley that was laden with tall deer grass and cedar trees, which we never got to see. But if we did see them, they would have opened up in us a different feeling than the apple orchard on the road that we took, or the blacksmith shop, or the stable that we saw. So that is just a very, very affirming imagery of what life is. That meaning is influenced and informed by which part of the path we are on and which path we have taken and what is along the path that we have. I think that's powerful. I think that is extremely powerful. It does make all the difference. The road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really just about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black, though I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. I do love his playful sense of aging at the end when he says, "And I shall be telling this somewhere, ages and ages hence," right? And not only is he going to tell it, he's going to tell it with a sigh. Oh, I will bemoan somewhere in my future that I didn't take the other path. So it is kind of a kick for us, right? To remind us that even when we choose because we want this path so desperately, people have this uncanny ability to complain about the fact that they didn't get the other two, right? Um, it's that story of the adult son who at during Hanukkah he comes to his mother's house for the lighting, and every day she gives a gift. Even though he's an adult, she gives him a gift every day. And the first day, for as they light the candles, she gives him a blue tie. And then so he comes to dinner the next day, and they light the candles. She gives him another gift. It's a red tie. And on the third day he comes, he's wearing the blue tie, and the mother looks at him and says, "What's the matter? You didn't like the red tie?" Regardless of what we have, even if we've chosen it, we always love to have the chance that we might have both. So I do love that. And I do love the sense, too, that you hear a little louder the second time through, right? Yet knowing how way leads onto way, that a path is never just the path, right? It's never just that one path. Somewhere down there's going to be a side trail that you're not going to stay on forever, but you're going to take that a little bit, because at the bottom you see that there's an Indian cave that you never saw before, and you want to go in and see it. And so you go see it, then you come back up that side trail to the main path and head on. But way leads on to way. There have been countless ways that lead on to way in our lives, and I think it's always worth telling a good story about all the different ways that have led on to different ways in your life, and sharing them with the people that you are around, or that you inhabit the same home or community or space with. This is what our lives are about: a sharing way that led on to way. So thank you, Robert. And we will close with yet another Americana image, one that is in many a person's mind and heart when it comes to winter, right? And the imagery of a nation that goes through historically the pathway that many writers have given for us of winter in New England. Very, very powerful imagery, and this is a part of it. I think we can go back, to James Fenimore Cooper to also see some of the early American writings about what the seasons were like, but or even in Whitman, we see some writing about the seasons. But this piece is a classic piece of winter. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though he will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods, they are lovely, dark, and deep, and I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Again, another classic Frostian line, right? The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, and I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, right? We've seen it on commercials, right? We've seen it in other literature that people have written, that sense that I got to get going. I've got tons more to do, more to experience, more to write about, more to paint about, more to share, more to uh, envelop in life. And that is sort of the theme of this poem, right? It's not just a poem about a snowy eve, although it is. It's a person stopping to take a look, to examine. Again, go back to the poem we just read, right? The examination of life, the choices that lay before us. We only get handfuls of times where we can become philosophically driven to say, ooh, this is a monumental choice I'm about to make, right? Ooh, this is a powerful time in my life. And I chose this poem because this pandemic is a powerful time in our lives. We often say things like, if I only had the time to do that, I would. We have more time now in our social distancing where we're not allowed to do certain other things. We have more time now that we could really access some of those things that we have said that about and envelop them in our lives and develop them in our lives during this time. And if we can pass the hurdle of the anxiety of a pandemic and hunker down with the reality of what is going on for us, the reality that we have more time in which to do other things, then there is some layer or level of conversion in that where we can make some sense out of this moment in our life. And it may just mean that there's 18 novels that you've wanted to read that you have sitting on a shelf somewhere that you never got to, or 12 puzzles you wanted to put together, right? Or 15 people that you've needed to call and touch base with, or write letters to, or postcards. So all of that is available. And this is Frost's intent, right? I think I kind of know where I'm at. I'm going to take a little pause here to look at this and try to figure out the beauty of this instance, the way the snow lay out on the land. Matter of fact, I'm here so long that my horse is probably thinking, this is stupid. What's he doing? He stopped. What's he thinking about? So he's taken a pause. He's taken count. He's taken stock. And then all of a sudden, something happens to wake him up. You know, he's looking at this field, and he's dreaming about all the wonderful things in life. And well, I think it's just like the harness bell shakes on the horse. It's like the horse is shaking his head saying, yo, don't forget, we're supposed to be going somewhere. So it kind of brings him back to himself. And that's when he says, oh, well, I got to get going. I got things to do. Places to go, people to meet, miles to go before I sleep. So what a wonderful example. And what poetry does is poetry takes the common everyday stuff of our life and somehow glorifies it and gives us a chance to look at it by itself, separated from other things, and made all pretty like that, so that we can say, hey, man, that's kind of cool. Actually, I forgot how much I love to just wander and stare at things and think, about the beauty and wonder of life. And then to do it so long that all of a sudden I have to be shaken back into reality. And then, oh, it's like daydreaming has been given purpose by Frost. So good people, daydream, would you please? Let's listen to his kind, dear words again. Stopping by a woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though he will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. That's luxury, right? To be able to sit and watch a woods fill with snow. That means you have so much time on your hands. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods, they're lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. My friend, my wish for you and for I is that we have enough time to be able to daydream about what we want to create in our life and what we want to exist in our life, to be able to change who we are and how we respond to things, to the way we see beauty in a vista that is on the other side of that window, or in the person who comes to bring us lunch or dinner or breakfast, in the phone call of a loved one, in the note of a dear friend, that somehow when a word arises in us, like Frost said, it can catch some emotion, and then that emotion can become a poem. This is what our life is. We have many, many, many stories to tell. Tell those stories. Share the places you have been, the roads you have taken, the woods you have stopped by, the crow that shook down snow on you. Share those stories, for those stories are who you are. Those stories have emotion of where you've been. Those stories of childhood memories, they have senses of nostalgia and joy in them. We can change our emotion by simply changing the story we tell and listening to the emotion that that story carries. Some of our stories will be sad. Some of them will be glorious and grand. And some of them will be minuscule and simple. But the stories that we have to tell, these are our life. These are very, very nourishing at this time in our life when we're experiencing a pandemic. We just have to be creative about ways in which we can do that. So somehow somebody got you this link and you're looking at this on a device of some kind of phone, a tablet, a computer. So you have presumably within reach some form of communication that you can reach out to other people. Maybe one thing you could do is share this with somebody you love. And that would be a gift from one person in isolation to another person in isolation. Or you could pick up the phone and call, tell somebody how much you love them. Or you could thank the people that are coming and going from your life on a daily basis, bringing you the things that you need or accessing them for you. My hope is that you'll be able to find the beauty that is in you, that has been stored there because of the life that you've lived, and you'll be able to share that with others. Thanks for your time, and maybe I'll see you again in the future. Bye-bye.